You rock, dude. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Cody the Koala. He's going to join us. I am so excited to talk with you all about React Server Components. My talk is titled, "And Now You Understand React Server Components." And it's my hope is that I can say that at the end of this talk. We'll see. Wish me luck. OK, before we get started, anybody who's been to one of my talks before knows what's about to happen. I'd like everybody to, if you're physically able, join us, stand up. This is moving your body to get blood flowing because your brain needs blood. So stretch out your arms in front of you, squat down like this, and come back up. This is an air squat. Do I need to come over here and demonstrate that? No, just, we're going to do 12 of these together. Count with me. Ready? 1, 2, you got to count. 2, 3, there we go. 4, 5, you're already feeling it. 6, the blood is going through your veins. 7, 8, 9, I'm seeing some smiles. You want to start over. 1, no, 2, 9, 11, 12. OK, stretch over your head as high as you possibly can, and even higher than that. And then over to one side, and over to the other. OK, now you can sit down. That feels great, yeah, right? So I understand that when you clap, I drink. Is that how this goes? OK, sounds like a messed up drinking game. So this slide showed up earlier. My face showed on it too many times, and now it's been corrected. So here are the people that were supposed to be shown earlier. Love these people. They're awesome. So thank you all for being a great community. So let's get into it. Back in 2020, when the React Server Components was announced, I remember some cognitive dissonance. I was like, why am I not super stoked about this? I'm normally so stoked about what's going on in React. And I thought, oh, well, Remix solves all the problems that they described when they announced React Server Components. So I guess I'm not excited because Remix already solves all those things. Well, it turns out I was wrong. I was missing something. And if you had a similar feeling, you're also wrong. You were missing something. And eventually I came around. And there are a couple things, really important things, that React Server Components can do that Remix cannot do it by itself. Next can't do it by itself. None of these frameworks can do by themselves. React Server Components is an enormous innovation. And my hope is that I can bring you on in my journey of discovery for for React Server Components and how they really work. So I built a framework on top of React Server Components. Mine's like pretty simple. It's for educational purposes only, but it changes you. You know at the end of Lord of the Rings, where Frodo and his friends make it back to the Shire, and they're like having a party, and all the people around them are like the same, and they're having a good time, but Frodo and his friends were totally changed. Like, I've seen a new experience. I've had a totally different experience from all these people, and so now I'm Mary over here, feeling totally changed, and here we've got some other Redwood and Waku and Remix. Oh, sorry, not Remix, goodness. React Router v7. And we made it to Mount Doom, and we threw the ring into the fire. Huh. That's interesting. So maybe you're feeling like, I don't understand React Server Components, and at this point, I'm afraid to ask. How many people are feeling that way? Really? You're all like, it's no shame at all if you're worried about, maybe you're too afraid to raise your hand. I guess I should have thought about that. My goal is to explain it in such a way that it's simple enough for anybody to understand. So hopefully I managed that in this talk. And the way that I'm going to do that is we're going to build a framework with React Server Components together. And I found that this is an extremely efficient way, or maybe not the most, sometimes it takes a lot of work, to be clear, but it's a really great way to really understand a technology. It's just build it yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just getting the mental model right. I learned this from my friend Merritt Christensen, who I think is in here. I was learning JavaScript, and he said, hey, if you build _JS, you'll really learn JavaScript. I never did it, but I've carried the advice with me forever, and it's really been helpful. So just like a speed run, if we're playing Legend of Zelda, they always have these rules of their speed runs. And so we've got a couple rules ourselves. We're not going to be using a bundler, no TypeScript, no JSX transform. We're just importing create element as H for hyperscript from React. No optimizations, no dependencies, with the exception of official React, React error boundary, and Hano.js. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I don't want you to be distracted by all of the many other tools that we use day to day as you're trying to figure out what are the pieces that make up React server components. Is that a Webpack thing, or is that like a React thing? So we're going to go no dependencies. What we're building is an API to fetch and render server components, a bundler to bundle and render client components, which is not actually a bundler. It's a node loader, which is a runtime module transformer, and a router, a client-side router, so that we can update our server components. A couple of things I'm going to take for granted also. You're already really optimistic about RSCs. I'm not here to convince you that RSCs are the bomb. I'm just here to help you understand them. If you want to be convinced that RSCs are amazing, then watch Evan's talk yesterday. It was phenomenal. Yes. Yeah, clap for Evan. That was so good. And yeah, it was so good. And then I also assume that you know the basics of RSCs. If you don't, then go watch Lydia's talk yesterday. Also a very good talk. And actually a lot. I feel like React Conf is React Server Components Conf, and plus React Native also. You're not, or you are smart enough to not do this in production because, again, we have no dependencies, no optimizations. What we're doing is not good. We're learning, though. And you're also willing to dive in for details later. So if you, actually, how many of you have gone through Epic React? A couple of you, yeah, wow, awesome, thank you. So Epic React v2 is what I'm working on right now, and what we're going to be going through is a part of Epic React v2. We're going to kind of get a preview of the workshop that I have for building React Server Component Framework. So if you want to dive into the details, you can go to that repo right now and go through the whole workshop on your own. Here's the app that we're building. It's a list detail view. We've got the ship ID and the search params and the URL. Pretty basic standard single-page app. So not even static site generated or anything like that. It's just very simple. Keep it simple. No client router either. So every click is going to be a full-page refresh, everything. The project also trying to keep that simple. It's a database, public directory for static assets, server, and our UI. OK, so now I'm coming to the computer, because we're going to explore things a bit. So this is our app.js at the start. We're fetching some data, and we're passing that to the use hook, which rocks, by the way. And we're rendering that with that data with our app. So pretty simple, straightforward stuff there. And then our server is just serving some static assets. We've got our API endpoint that is sending all of the data that our UI needs. And then we have our, this is just a SPA, right? So any other request sends the index HTML. Man, that's a throwback. Let's move over to RSCs. What does it take to move over to RSCs? How is RSCs different from what we've been doing for a really long time? So with the current app, we're going to request data, and then we're combining it with React components, these templates, and poof, we put them together, and now we got React elements magically, and then we send that off to React DOM to turn it into DOM nodes. Right? So the poof part that creates the React elements, we're just moving that over to the server. So actually, not a lot changes when you move architecturally when you're switching to RSCs. It's just taking that computation of creating React elements, moving it over to the server. The tricky bit is how do you get those React elements to the client? And so that's what we're going to be doing here. So here's our API. It's just returning some data. This is what we're going for, the RSC payload. You've seen it a couple times today. I'm not going to dive too deep, and yesterday. I'm not going to dive too deep into the actual format. Some of you are thinking, why couldn't it have just been HTML? Isn't that the format of the web? Like, why couldn't this have just generated HTML? We already do that with server rendering. But there's a really good reason, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So we need to create this format. And the way that we're going to do that is in our server, we bring in, I just realized, that's kind of small, isn't it? I did look at this earlier. Oh, I can't bump it up either. Sorry. Dang. I looked at it earlier. OK, so the way that we do this is with render to pipeable stream. But it's coming from this package called React Server DOM ESM. That is actually not published. This is inside the React repo. And it's not published for a good reason, because it's missing a lot of optimizations. Don't do this in production. But render to pipeable stream knows how to take React elements and convert it into that format. And so here in our API endpoint, instead of data, we're getting props. And then we pass those props to our app component, which we're now importing on the server side as opposed to the client. And we pass that into render to pipeable stream. It turns those elements into that RSC format and sends that off to the client. And then here in our UI side of things and the front end side of things, we have rendered a React Server DOM ESM client. That gives us a create from fetch, and that's going to convert it from that RSC payload back into React elements. And as a result, we can just return those React elements. So there's nothing special at that point. You just like convert it back into React elements, and now React just, oh, here's some React elements. I know what to do with that, and now React DOM creates DOM nodes. Magic. It's pretty cool. And I want to call out one thing specifically is like I'm using a server here, but you don't have to use a server with RSCs. I think the React team is trying to like make sure this can be a bundler process, but we're doing a server. We're replacing our API endpoints with RSC endpoints. OK, sweet. Now we have RSCs. That's it. So the idea is you have your app, you turn it into React elements, right? You create element. And then you pass that into rendered pipeable stream. That turns it into our special format, the RSC payload. We pass that into create from fetch. That turns it back into React elements. And then we pass it to root.render, your React DOM. And that turns it into the div. And I don't know, but I imagine what Evan was doing was really similar just on the native side. Like this probably would be the only difference right there. So this unlocks a lot of things. So now we can have async components. Lydia already showed you this, so I'm not going to go into that. It also is streaming and being able to set suspense boundaries and stuff. Out of order streaming, super cool stuff. Lydia showed you that too, so I'm not going to go into that. Server context, I'm pretty sure you can figure that out, so we're not going into that. The thing that, up to this point, everything that we have done, we've accomplished, we could have done like 15 years ago with PHP, right? And this is why everybody's like, RSCs, they're just PHP. Like, but this is where we go off in a different direction, and we are able to do something that I've never seen before. And that is the ability to compose the UI stuff with our server stuff. And this is just so sick. But there's there's something that is important or kind of tricky about use client, which I think is why it's been hard for people to understand RSCs. So here's the use case that we're going to support. This is a little editable text thing that I've got here. So it renders a button. When you focus on it, you hit enter, and it changes to an input. Then you can make a change. You hit enter, and submits. Shout out to Ryan Florence. I stole his code from Trellix. So this is a UI thing that's happening on the client. This requires some state. I need to know, am I in edit mode, and all of that. And that's what makes this a little bit tricky for RSCs. But let's look at the implementation. Here's our ship details. And inside of ship details, this is a server component. You can see it's async, and we're loading our ship and all of that. Right here, we're rendering the editable text component. And if we dive into the implementation of the editable text component, then we'll see a couple of things that make this tricky for RSCs. And that is mostly these use state hooks, but also the action here and the onClick. So these things can't be serialized. A thing that I've heard a lot of people say about RSCs is it's just serialized JSX. You take JSX and you stringify it, basically. And I like that idea because you cannot serialize something that's in memory. Like, of course, we could somehow figure out how to persist it, but what happens when the user makes a change on the client and now they need updated server components? Like, where does that state go? Like, how do we reconcile that difference? We can't serialize this state. And so it has to live in kind of a different environment when we're generating our server components. And so what we do is we add this use client directive to the top, which Dan taught us yesterday is a door into the client world. I actually really like that metaphor. So if you missed his talk, go watch that. It was awesome. And this enables our render to pipeable stream to generate this in the output. So it's just a reference to the client component. So rather than being the actual output from the client component, we're not going to call anything in that client module. Instead, we're just going to have references to all the exports from that client module and a mechanism for loading those modules. So here we have, this is the path to that module, and here's the namespace or the export that we're going to be getting off of that. And then throughout the rest of the payload, we're going to be referencing this particular component so that create from fetch can dereference those and get the actual component and render when it's time to render. So how do we do this? It's a two-step process. The first step is we need to take the client module and turn it into something else. Because we can't run those functions. We can't create that state, anything. We are going to turn that module into a bunch of references to the exports. To do this, we're going to use a node loader. The implementation details are different for every. This is why we've got Webpack integrations and stuff like that. But for our simple scenario, we're going to import the server register RSC loader file when we start up our server. That's going to register the RSC loader. So if you're familiar with node loaders, this is familiar to you. If you're not, it's not a big deal. Just think about a node loader as here's the module that's importing things. Here's the module that's being imported. As it's importing, it's coming back, and we've got this little thing in the middle that takes that string and converts it to something else before it gets to the importing module. And so this is what that loader looks like. Thank you, Sebastian, for writing most of it. But I added a console log right here so we can actually see what does the module look like when it's been transformed. So let's take a look at that. This is our source. It goes through our node loader, and before it shows up at whoever's importing the module, they're going to get this. And what this is, again, another implementation detail of this particular package. But the idea is we're taking all of the exports of the module and creating these client references, because this is a client module. We'll pass in this function that if somebody happens to call it, they're not supposed to, and it should never happen, but if they do, then we're going to give them a nice error. But then we also provide the location of the module, and then the export that we're representing. And with that information, we need to actually take this file and convert it to something else. We basically need to chop all this extra stuff off because we don't want to send that to the client. That would be silly to send the full file path. And so that's what the next step is to get it into this format, which will happen in our server. We just create a module-based path, and we pass that to rendered pipeable stream. Again, implementation detail. And then render pipeable stream will relativize all of those paths. And then on the UI, we tell create from fetch how to resolve those references to the URLs that they need to access all of our modules. Okay? And so now, with that, we can use client components throughout our application. Composing things, server goes into client, and then we pass some more server stuff. And it's magical, the things that we can do. Again, watch Evan's talk. So cool. But the UI needs to be updated. As the user is changing and navigating around and stuff, right now they click on a link and a full page refresh, and it technically works, but it is technically awful. So we are not going to do that. We're going to build a router. And the guts of our router, we've got a couple utilities in this UI router right here. We've got our context, so this is only loaded on the client, and a couple other utilities. And then in our UI index right here, we've changed a couple of things. This was a pretty simple file before. Now we've refactored a couple of things. But the most important thing for you to understand is that we're still creating our initial content promise and everything, but we need to be able to change the location. So we're no longer just using the initial location as the user's navigating. We need to be able to change that. So we're going to stick that in state. We also need to be able to change the content because the user navigating, they're getting new React server component payloads. So we're going to store the promise in our state. And then we still are doing use, content promise. All of that is the same as before. It's just now this is in state. It's something that can be changed over time. And that changes inside of our navigate function. We'll get the next location. We'll set that we'll update the location to where we're going. We'll fetch new content. We'll call create from fetch to convert it back into React elements, and then we'll update the content promise inside of a transition, so all the suspense boundaries work and all of that stuff. And what I find really interesting about this is if you were to do the same thing without RSCs and just I need to go fetch new data and render my React elements and stuff, this is exactly what it would look like, except it would be less awesome. So I like RSCs because it allows me to do all the cool things Evan showed. So it's pretty much go get me the new data, update the history, all of that. And then we have client-side navigations, and our users are much happier. They'll interact with their app more. So there are more problems we got to deal with now. So there's pending UI if it's slow. That's something that we can totally deal with, but we don't have time to get through that. Also, you have to worry about history, so you got pop state and all of that stuff, and making sure you're going to grab the content when you go back and all of that. But then the browser actually caches stuff for you when you navigate forward and back. So you actually, because you're in charge, you have to do that yourself. That's a pain. And so this is why you hear the React team saying, hey, I think you should use a framework, because a framework is going to do all of this stuff for you. Oh my gosh, I messed up my slides again. Oh yeah, React Router v7. It's the same picture. So use a framework, and then you don't have these problems. But build a framework, and you understand what the framework is doing. You get that? That is a really powerful concept. All right, so let's talk about actions. Oh, just kidding. I am over by 26 seconds. Maybe we'll do this next time. So if you really want to dive deep into all of that stuff, then the entire thing is on the Epic Web GitHub org. You can go through it all. It's intended to be self-paced. I'm giving this stuff away. I am in the process of recording the videos, and you can go buy those and go with me, travel through the journey with me. But I think that it's really valuable to have this education for everybody. So go through the workshop and dive deeper on these concepts. I think it's really valuable. And of course, give me stars, because that's how I eat, I think. And now you understand React Server Components, I hope. You all are fantastic. Thank you so much.